Hello and welcome to another edition of Critical Q&A, the show where I answer your questions based on what you have sent me by email at askchrisshelton@gmail.com or have left for me in the comment section of my Q&A videos. Now I get to start pointing down to the comment section again. All right, guys. So welcome back to another show. Thank you for inviting me into your home to answer your questions for this week. And we've got some pretty good ones. But at first, I wanted to plug the podcast for this week. It was a nice long chat I had with John Atack. We have probably done 25 or 30 episodes or something together at this point. So many conversations, so much good information in them. And this last one I am particularly fond of because we covered critical thinking in some real detail. And this is something that I have not done in a while. And I have developed a lot of new ideas and thinking about critical thinking and kind of come to a place of understanding of it that is far better than it used to be. And so I wanted to talk about that and sort some things out on that with John, and we did. And we had a great conversation about that. We then got into the topic of human predators. And this is something you're going to be hearing more from me about because narcissists and, these kind of more diagnostic kind of words are words I'm going to be moving away from as much as I can, except when I'm using them in an extremely precise way. If I use the word narcissist, I mean narcissist, not just some random insult. And it's not always been that way. And it's been loosey-goosey and difficult and a problem because these words, these diagnostic words, they are laden with problems. There are a number of issues with using them as pejoratives or insults and stuff like that. And it gets used so often that way that we're on an effort to try to sort of go away from those psychiatric labels. Because you, me, non-psychiatric people really have no business calling other people with these diagnostic labels. It's not accurate. It's not helpful. It doesn't clarify anything. It doesn't make us feel any better or them feel any better by doing that. And there are other words we can use that really do the job without having to get into diagnosing this person's mental condition. And so, again, unless I'm being super, super precise, and like I'm talking about certain cult leaders who I feel very justified and can back up with evidence why I would use diagnostic labels like narcissist to talk about somebody like L. Ron Hubbard or David Miscavige. But to just throw that label around to people you don't like, don't want to be, don't think, know what they're talking about, or are self-absorbed or egotistical, fine, call them self-absorbed and egotistical. It's a big difference from calling somebody a narcissist. So anyway, just wanted to kind of throw that out there. And that's just one of many terms that we are misusing and abusing. And that's why I'm trying to sort of, say, hey, let's try doing something different. And in this is not at all what John and I got into. We really went much more into, what human predators are, why they are, what they're acting like, et cetera. So anyway, I hope you guys will check out the podcast for this week. And with that big, huge plug, I also wanted to thank recent Patreon signups and startups on that. Not everybody wants to be named by name, but I do want to go out of my way to acknowledge and thank those of you who have signed on with Patreon lately. I really appreciate the support, and the channel, of course, deserves it. So thank you very much for that. And I hope you guys who are liking and supporting this channel will continue to do so, and that we will get more on board with this. All right. So with all that being said, let's get on with your questions for this week. Michael Yoder. Given the level of control in Scientology, do you think that LRH was influenced by George Orwell, 1984, Animal Farm, and Aldous Huxley, Brave New World? Those books are about controlling society and how people are allowed to behave, think, and feel, and fit within Steve Hassan's BITE model. Curious about your thoughts on how those works affected the development of Scientology and other cults. Okay, Michael, thank you for this. Clearly, L. Ron Hubbard did know about or read from 1984 because he comments on Orwell in a few places, in some lectures and in some written work. And he actually wrote a policy, which I broke down, about propaganda by redefinition of terms. And this is the title of a policy letter that Hubbard wrote. So he was well aware of the fact that words are important, words have power, and that you could redefine words and engage in propaganda or an effort at mind control or thought reform by, using and abusing words. So, did he learn that from Orwell? Probably not. See, one thing about people like Orwell, Aldous Huxley, and other writers who have fictionalized or written nonfiction works about abusers or leaders who take advantage, or these bad people, right? Authoritarians, totalists, as Lifton likes to call them, and I prefer the term totalist to authoritarian, because it's a totalist sort of thing. You want all these people, all these followers, to be completely, totally committed to your cause or effort, or you as an individual, when you're a cult leader or one of these totalist types. So we've got a number of those people around, and I think these writers were simply observing human behavior and fictionalizing and writing about that in order to try to teach or get people to see, hey, wake up, folks. There are people out there who do this, and you need to be aware of it because they're doing it to you. And, this is kind of important stuff. And we think in stories so much easier than we think with facts and figures and numbers. So, the artists and the writers have really had the advantage in leading the way and showing up and pointing out problems in our society, this being one of them. So Hubbard himself was a writer, but he was a very poor writer, and he was not much of a reader. It's a difficult thing with Hubbard to gauge exactly. I can't sit here and say for sure Hubbard did or didn't read 1984, Animal Farm, Brave New World. I don't know. He certainly would have claimed to, and he did talk about them, but that doesn't mean he read them. Hubbard was, as John and I have gone over a few times, Hubbard was not much of a reader. He was the kind of guy who liked to have people explain the books to him or go read the Reader's Digest condensed versions, which used to be immensely popular, by the way. You don't see those around a whole lot now, but he was a Cliff Notes kind of guy, and that was how I think he got through a lot of his schooling, was cheating the system or trying to game it. He bragged in lectures, for example, about getting other people to take his tests for him, and then he would do some writing assignment for them or something. So he was always about gaming the system. So Hubbard was sort of organically or naturally the kind of totalist personality that these authors write about. And you don't need to go read about these kind of personalities to be one or become one. It's sort of like you are one, and you fall into circumstances or conditions, or you create circumstances or conditions where you're able to influence or take advantage of other people. And the more you do that, and the more clever you are about it, and the more successful you are at it, the more you do it. And this is Hubbard's, operating pattern through all of life, as he was sneaking and sliming his way in and out of his responsibilities and duties in the military, in college, in his professional life, and most especially, of course, in his personal life, in his married life, being a serial philanderer, that sort of thing. The man could not keep a commitment, could not keep a promise, no matter how light, how, serious, no matter where it was. Just honesty and integrity and honor were complete strangers to L. Ron Hubbard's way of life and way of thinking. So basically what I'm saying is, I don't know that L. Ron Hubbard, read and learned from these books how to do what he did better. It's certainly possible. But I don't know that the more I've learned about these kind of people, and the more deep dives I've done in studying, the L. Ron Hubbards and David Koresh's of the world, the more it's come very clear to me that that these are people who are opportunists, who are always looking for the angles, are always making angles if none exist, in order to con people or get one over on people for their own advantage. And they just become so practiced at it, and it's such an approach to their life, that they end up being people who approach their lives and think about other people in very different ways than you and I do. You and I believe, tend to think about other people as, okay, well, they're not us, but they're valuable, they're important, they're equals to us, or they are people who we should listen to or tolerate the existence of, at least, and get along with, because this is society. This is how we do things. And what you don't do is you don't look to other people and immediately start calculating what advantages this person will give you or you can have over on them if you abuse them, scream at them, yell at them, or somehow get control of them. And what can they do for you if you do that? And that's how you think about other people. Or you look at group situations and you go, how can I take advantage of this situation so that they are empowering me and I am depowering them? Because they could, if they see me for who I really am, then I'm going to be in a lot of trouble. So I need to make sure they don't. So I need to mouth sounds. I need to say words that they will think make me into this, amazing person. And Hubbard was quite good at that. Life of the party, really big social person, always taking conversations over, very dominating, kind of personality. When he was in the room, he always liked to be the guy in the room. And he always, of course, considered himself the smartest guy in the room or the cleverest guy in the room, even if he wasn't. Which he very rarely was. I mean, it was very rare that Hubbard had the upper hand on people for real, but he would always make it out that he did. So anyway, I'm kind of going on and on about this, but I'm just trying to answer the question of, well, where did L. Ron Hubbard come up with his ideas? Where does this where is this bent come from? And it's it's a lot more organic. It's not necessarily as learned behavior as some of us would maybe take some comfort in thinking. It's just that their outlook, what I'm trying to stress is that the outlook of a totalist personality or, a narcissist or a narcissistic personality is fear, is based in a core of fear, with layers of deception and anger and a whole lot of lying to themselves. About themselves, their condition, their place in the world, their importance in relation to other people, their ability, their skills. I mean, there's a lot of layers going on to these personalities. And learning from other similar personalities could certainly be part of that picture. But when it came to L. Ron Hubbard, I don't know that was actually necessary. I think he sort of figured things out by the process of life and living, how to sort of mess with people or manipulate people. And sometimes it worked, and a lot of the times it did not work. Hubbard was pretty much, I mean, if we believe what we've read from other soldiers in the military who were around him when he was active duty, he was not well liked. He was not well respected. He was somebody who people thought of as a slacker and an avoider, and somebody who didn't do work or tried to wrap other people up in his schemes and plans to avoid having to work or having to do his duty and that kind of thing. We see a lot of that. But we also see this bipolar sort of thing with him, where some days he's super on, and other days he's absolutely miserable and in the drinks and in the cups and doing the reds and greens and all of that. So he's so Hubbard was kind of all over the place depending on what time you were talking to him of the day or year or whatever. So lots and lots of stuff going on there, but. I don't know. I hope that answers the question or addresses the question. I tried to speak on Hubbard's personality there and where I think some of those things came from, and I hope that I succeeded. AC. In my life, I have had numerous occasions where I've discussed religion with local Christians who've attempted to add me to their fold. Being an open-minded, critical thinker, I have had no issue discussing the topic with them. However, one thing has always frustrated me. They will not put the Bible down when talking about their faith, even when I ask them directly. Everything they say is related to or directly from the Bible. Is this common in religion? If I could somehow get them to put aside the Holy Book, would I be more successful in arguing my point, which is that unfortunately there likely is no God, and we die, and that's the end of it. I figure that they're going to try to convert me. I am free to express my view as well. They initiated the conversation, not me. Anyways, thanks for answering and keep up the good work. All right, AC, thank you for this. God, there's a lot of layers here, of course, but I think what I want to say on this is that we invest, I can't talk in a lot of detail about this because I don't know, as much as I would like to know about this. But symbols and icons and books, these things that sort of are symbolic of our beliefs or our idols, these are important to us. These, there's a lot of words for this, but at the end of the day, it's something or some symbol that represents all kinds of concepts and beliefs and ideas that we have, good, bad, right, wrong, all over every spectrum. I can show you certain symbols and you will immediately have, certain reactions to them, visceral, emotional reactions. I can show you other symbols and other books and things, and you have nothing, or nothing would register at all because there was no significance or emotional investment at all in your life connected with those symbols or signs or books. The Bible happens to be one of the most symbolic representations of Christianity, Islam, Judaism. I mean, there's a lot in this book. There's a lot invested in this book. It's the big book. It's the holy book. It's the book with a capital B. So the Bible has a tremendous amount of cultural significance and can then therefore translate over into a tremendous amount of individual significance for individual believers who are told that the Bible is the, sort of ultimate expression or ultimate rendering of God's will and God's word. This book is exactly precisely what God said or what God wanted us to read so that we would get his, holy word and be inspired and our faith renewed or created or bolstered or whatever. And that's why you'll get people who especially, people who are trying to convert you, people who are out proselytizing. They feel so strongly about the power of this that they want to share the good news. They want to get this to you. They want you to understand this and live by the same faith and the same tenets. And they believe, of course, that by doing so, they're ensuring their place in the kingdom. And they are also doing this because they have told themselves and they believe, and I'm sure it's true, that they, for the most part, that they have a lot of compassion and caring for other people, and they want to, save them. So the Bible represents, it's sort of a thing that gets to represent all of that, right? All of those good intentions and good ideas and God and all of that gets put in there. So when you take that away or try to remove that out of the conversation, right? It's kind of like inviting somebody to a meal and then taking the food off the table. Like, what are we doing here? Like, suddenly, wait a minute. I thought we were like this is from their point of view, from the proselytizer's point of view. This is what you need. This is the thing that has all the truth in it. It's not the individual proselytizer or believer who has the ability to convince you of the truth. It's this book that does, because they believe this book is what convinced them and is the reason for their fervent, ardent belief. So they want to pass that on to you, right? So in other words, it's all invested in that. You could have the same degree of investiture in the book Dianetics or Fundamentals of Thought. Scientology books, right? Where, Hubbard was really, really big on, sell them books. You have to get the book in their hand. Now, you could say that was just a money grab or a cash grab to sell his books, but Hubbard knew that he had a way with words and that he could convince it was a numbers game. And if he could get his books into people's hands, and remember, this is back in the 50s and 60s when people predominantly read books, and they weren't online. So buying a book, having a book, especially Hubbard stressed a hardcover, big book, a weighty book, that gives it a more weight, more significance, more importance. And for people who believe that things are important and are symbols of their faith and contain all the holy words of their faith, and that this book is the thing that's going to convince you, it's not, I'm drawing the Dianetics comparison here to show that it's not just Christians who do this. You could do this with the Quran. You could do this with the Torah. You could do this with any other holy book. I'm sure there's Sanskrit books or Buddhist books or, those kind of things. So it's just a matter, I'm obviously sitting here talking all about symbols and icons and things and how we invest in them. So I guess I just wanted to comment on that part of it because it was such a prominent part of your question here. And with such people, I would say you're going to have a real hard time separating them from that book, because it's there's a view that has been expressed in the atheist Christian battleground that I see online all the time. There are people who have asserted that that there are some Christians, not all, I'm not painting with a broad brush here, but there are certainly more than a few who are more Biblists than they are Christians. In other words, the Bible is their thing more so than Christ, or even that whole resurrection and the faith, and just having this kind of idea of personal resurrection or salvation and stuff. They go way, way, way more into it, and the Bible becomes this thing of exaggerated super importance. So maybe that's some of what you're running into there too. But people need their symbols, and the fact is that most people who are out proselytizing are doing so because of a fervor that they feel more than the knowledge that they have. It's an emotional thing. It's much more so than it's an intellectual thing. There's a little bit of knowledge. I got some Bible quotes for you. I've got some stories to tell you. But mostly what I want to get across to you is this represents this incredible feeling, this ardent fervor, this love we have for Christ, this love we have for God, this love we have for you. It's just so wonderful, right? And that when they're talking that way, that's when you're really at the core of this, this sort of euphoric love, admiration, fervor kind of feeling that is really what's kind of driving a lot of that. That's what I've seen, at least, and experienced. I haven't read widely of this, but what I've seen and experienced, that's what I can sort of comment on about it. I hope I'm not painting with too broad a brush in talking about this. I know that there are people who have other intentions and ideas when they're out proselytizing, but this is what I've seen and run into, and certainly what I think you're describing in your question here. And as far as arguing back, argue away, but realize that they're not, based on everything I just said, right, and everything else I know about this, these are folks who are not believers because they reasoned their way into it. So attempting to reason them out of it is probably not going to get you anywhere. And this is the constant battle that goes on in the atheist world that I am pretty much just tired of at this point, because it's just so exhausting that people come out of these faiths or beliefs and think they're going to argue people out of it, and it just doesn't really work that way, because that's not why people get into it, and it's not why people get out of it. And that's in the most part. I'm not saying that there isn't anybody who never reasoned their way out of religion, but generally speaking, it has a lot more to do with emotional breaks and emotional ties and social hierarchies and stuff like that than it has to do with reasoning and applying a lot of intellectual thought to the religious process. So anyway, I don't know. Let me know what you think about that answer. Steph CLO. What do you feel would be your top 5 reasons/happenings of Scientology implosion in the past 2 decades? As an example, it could be Mike Rinder's blog, the Going Clear doc, your channel, looking at a 2-decade view. All right. Thank you for this question. It's a good one. And it's tough. It's a tough one, because I actually sat and sort of through 5 things. Because I might be insulting people a little bit here. But this is just from my point of view, okay? And everybody's got their own point of view on this. And whatever it is that's changed people's minds about Scientology could be, whatever. But as I see it, there's been a chain of events that have occurred that have basically exposed Scientology in waves of exposure in a very, very public way. And while none of that exposure could ever have occurred without all the work that was done before, like I said many, many times, we are standing on the shoulders of giants in the work that we do. We have the Jerry Armstrongs and Lawrence Wallersheims of the world, and and the people who went after Scientology in the courts in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and took just boatloads of shellacking for it. And those are names that are now in the history books, so to speak. They're not publicly speaking out a whole lot anymore. They're not really around. Some people have moved on or passed on. And so all of that initial work that was done, I'm talking about back in the ARS days and, all that kind of stuff, that all had to happen for any of this later stuff to happen. And I always go to great pains to try to point that out, because I don't want to forget about those people, and I don't want them to feel like their story wasn't important, wasn't part of this big picture, or part of why it is that we were able to strike such hard blows against Scientology. It was because of what they were putting out there. And, in the early days of the internet and the early days, even pre-internet. Now, the 5 things I think in the past 2 decades that have built on all of that have allowed or have broken, Scientology basically, come down to this. First, there is the 2008 anonymous international campaign of protests and work that was done, taunting the church, teasing the church, attacking the church sometimes in ways that I didn't particularly think were smart. But Mark Bunker did a great job of kind of tampering some of that, reeling some of that angst and energy in, and focusing it so that they were more effective by engaging in mass public protests outside Scientology organizations all over the world. That drew a tremendous amount of press and media attention, and Scientology was not powerless to fight back, but it was powerless to effectively fight back. They could not. There were a couple of people that they got names of and that they prosecuted who were anonymous members who were doing some stuff that wasn't really too cool. But for the most part, it was a one-sided battle, and Scientology lost bad. In fact, they've never recovered, because that was just the first of a number of things. The second thing being Mike Rinder and Marty Rathbun both coming out high-level defectors, both of them. And they were able to credibly expose David Miscavige and his physical abuses. And everybody else who came out after that, Tom and Amy Scobie and the other people who came out around that time or after and started speaking up, Mark and Claire Headley, even before Mike and Marty. But that kind of that happening, that gaggle of people, because what that resulted in was the SP run, or the Truth Rundown in the St. Pete Times. And that got international attention and exposure because it was a multi-article breakdown of Scientology's abuses in the here and now, in the 2000s, not ancient history from the 70s, 80s, or 90s. So that was a really, really big deal, that series of articles, and the people who came out and came forward to make those articles happen. So that was, so I'll say Mike and Marty on that one as the leaders of that charge, so to speak. But again, you say stuff like that, and then it's like, well, what about Mark and Claire? What about Tom? What about Amy? What about these other people who wrote books and were speaking out too? So all of them, right? Even on that line, Tori was prominent in that. But the SP Times thing is what the product was that exposed the Scientology in the big way, and that's what I think was huge in that time. Following that, of course, or around that, was the Debbie Cook email. That cannot be taken too lightly or forgotten about. That influenced me in my leaving, as well as so many other Scientologists. That was a bold move. It was Debbie and others put that together and got that out there. And immediately there was a backlash from the church, and Debbie owned them because attorney Ray Jeffries got her to testify on the stand for about 4 or 5 straight hours about the whole. And, people didn't know about this stuff, and this wasn't in the court record before, and nobody knew what the hell she was talking. What, and so, all of this stuff again coming out, and Scientology capitulated and folded immediately, right? Hey, shut up, quiet. Here, take all this money and just go shut up and go away, right? And she did. Because if she hadn't, there could have been, pretty drastic consequences for her. And, it's easy to look back and judge people on that. But having been around during that time and being part of that, I think Debbie was justified in what she did. Then we have the Going Clear documentary, Alex Gibney and Lawrence Wright's book made into a documentary where, again, all these people got to speak on camera. The whole story got to be told, and more exposure of the whole. Alex Gibney is a brilliant documentarian. He really is. And he did a great job with that. And then finally, number 5 is Scientology in the Aftermath. There is nothing that has hit Scientology like Scientology in the Aftermath, but only because it built on all these earlier things. If Scientology in the Aftermath had just come out all on its own, it would not have had the impact it had. But because of all these earlier things, it was a chain reaction. And so, Emmy-winning, award-winning series, like Mike and Leah putting that together and fighting with the producers every season to get the stories told, put it out there, get the truth out there about this. And that happened, and it was as good as it was, and it was exposure. It was exposing as it was, because Mike and Leah were at the helm, and because the other Scientologists and ex-Scientologists rather that they got on board, as well as the other professionals who they interviewed on those during those seasons. So just a runaway success at exposing Scientology's nonsense, and it's still running on Netflix right now. So, so you can see it anytime you want, and lots of millions and millions of people have. It was I think it was the second most, if not first most popular documentary ever shown on HBO when it first, the Going Clear documentary rather. And then we have the Scientology in the Aftermath coming after. So anyway, both of these things, really, really big deals. And, okay, so those are my 5 points. Now I'm going to add to this though, something that kind of is a glue that kind of holds all these together, and so I have to put it in here. It cannot be forgotten about or denied, is Tony Ortega's blog, because that has been the place where outside journalists or other media interests have always gone to, always gotten the skinny. Daily Mail and TMZ and other places are constantly taking stories from Tony's blog where he's breaking them. He has done championship work for, well over a decade now on Scientology and its abuses. And he's done a really good job of that. And he's done it every day of the week. I mean, I'm telling you, man, that is not easy work to do. Not by any stretch of the imagination. It's just not. So Tony deserves huge accolades for the work that he has done exposing every single aspect of Scientology. I mean, there's just been nothing that has not been covered on his blog. He has gone to every level, every part of it. And I can't validate him enough for that work. So those are the things I think are the 5 things with the glue of Tony's blog keeping it all together. I think that my work, Tori's work, Karen's work, the other YouTubers and the stuff that we do, it doesn't not matter. But I wouldn't put any of us in the top 5 in terms of influence or what we've done to expose Scientology. We've done some really great work, but I think these 5 things are the things that actually have turned the tide. And when you look at what I mean by that, we're talking about, lower numbers of members than ever before, cancellation of the RPF, a lessening of the, just draconian abortion crap they were pulling, and a lot of other, abusive stuff. But Scientology can't change its spots. It's, we've gotten some changes with that, but then we find out during COVID that Miscavige amped up the pain in other ways. Because there's a point that needs to be made about David Miscavige that I only just kind of clicked on, actually listening to a clip of a Jordan Peterson clip talking about Hitler of all things. But it kind of triggered, I was like, oh, right, with a light bulb. And this is kind of important, so check this out. I'm not quoting Jordan Peterson here. Don't. If you hate Jordan Peterson, you can keep hating Jordan Peterson. It was only a thing that clicked for me. Point is, David Miscavige is not about the mission of Scientology. Whether he believes in it or not, whether he wants it to grow or not, it's abundantly clear that he is not doing what L. Ron Hubbard was trying to do. Or at least what L. Ron Hubbard said he was trying to do. David Miscavige is not honestly following that same path. He is in it for power, he's in it for money, he's in it for influence, and mostly he's in for it because, I believe, because there are people who want to watch the world burn. There are people who want to create as much chaos as they can. That's their product. That's what they do. That's what they want to do. That's actually their desire. They don't, everything they say they're doing is just window dressing. It's just words they say. What they're really trying to do is tear the hell out of everything as much as they possibly can. And everything they do is moving always in that direction of ripping people up, destroying things, and causing chaos. And that's Hitler, that's Miscavige. I mean, these are people who have made real world decisions that are completely irrational, follow no logic of any kind, connected with what they've said their purpose or intention is. What they do is not that, and it's so much not that in review of it, you have to go, they never intended to do what they said they were going to do. They always intended to just screw things up. That's Hitler, that's Miscavige. And so when you wonder, why does he reframe the point of view that you're coming at it from, and there's two things on that. One, this is a person who's just trying to tear things up and cause chaos. And two, Scientology is a money-making scam, first and foremost. And if you know those two things, and you think about Scientology, and by comparison, other destructive cults fit into this in one way or another. If you try to make sense of it by looking at what they say they're doing and then try to look at that from a logical point of view, none of it will ever make sense. But if you look at it from the point of view that it's a money-making scam run by a person who wants to cause as much chaos as he possibly can before he dies, and that's what his thing is, then everything makes sense about it. Suddenly it all makes complete and total sense. And everything about it is a total lie. And you realize that it has to be a total lie in order for it to continue to exist the way that it does. And so that's what I wanted to get into on answering this question. I hope that really long thing gave you some things to at least some food for thought and stuff to think about. And I'd love to hear your responses or comments on that in the comments to this video. So let me know. Oscar Q. Zilch. It seems to me that tons of Scientology celebs have worked on films and movies that feature people not being absolutely quiet during scenes of violence or trauma, something which, according to Dianetics, causes debilitating engrams. Unlike removing engrams, there is no money to be made in preventing engrams. But assuming that Hubbard's theories are uncontestable scientific fact, wouldn't society be radically healthier within a generation if we discourage dialogue and excessive noise, such as sirens after traumatic events? Shouldn't there be a citizens' commission for being quiet during accidents, a front group that would picket movies like Jack Reacher for setting a bad example of engram-generating activity? Oh, Oscar, your question is just dripping with irony and sarcasm, but it's a good one. And it's kind of funny because, of course, what you're talking about here is in Dianetics, the Modern Science of Mental Health in 1950, L. Ron Hubbard asserted that the single sole cause of all of our psychosomatic illnesses, insanity, war, crime, poverty, every problem that we have socially and individually comes from this thing called the reactive mind. And the reactive mind is made up of engrams, and engrams are incidents, events that happen to you that contain pain and unconsciousness. If something happens to you and it was painful and you went unconscious, even for a microsecond or two, that's an engram. And those engrams are stored in your reactive mind. And a part of their content is the words that were said. And the words that were said by people around you, words have meaning, right? And so later on, when the pain is approximated in the real world, you've moved on. It's a year later, it's 2 years, it's 3 years later, And here you are, and you got bit by a dog years ago, and here's a dog barking right now, and it kind of reminds you subconsciously of the same dog that bit you because it's the same breed, or it makes the same noises or something, or it's the same color, or you're in the same location. For whatever reason, enough of the present situation is approximating the past one, and so you start hurting, and the reactive mind is turning on and telling you to avoid this dog and avoid this dog sound. But it's doing it all subconsciously. And the words that were said back when you were hurt, when you got bit by the dog, could have been words like, "Oh my God, look out! Oh man, that must hurt! Oh geez, are you okay?" Maybe people around you saying things. "Oh God, that's gonna hurt." Stuff like that. Well, those words are part of the engram. And so, according to L. Ron Hubbard, none of this is true. Okay, none of this is true, but this is L. Ron Hubbard's theory, quote unquote, from Dianetics, is that those words are going to influence you. And because they have meaning and because they have significance, when the reactive mind starts feeding them to you later, they're going to act like commands. So when you hear the words, "Oh man, that's going to hurt," that somebody, kind of innocently or jokingly said when you got bit by a dog, now later on that acts like a command. And so you hurt all over, or your hand hurts, or wherever it was that you got bit hurts, but generally the words are, "Oh, that's going to hurt." So however that's interpreted in the moment, "Oh, now I hurt." And you have all this pain all of a sudden. You have no idea why. And if it was really bad, according to Hubbard, where maybe this was your dog and the dog was barking all the time and constantly keeping that engram in restimulation, meaning that it's kind of subconsciously activated, then you're always going to hurt. And so here you have this new chronic pain that you don't know where it's coming from. You don't know why you have it, but every time you're around the dog, you hurt. Or every time the dog starts barking, you hurt. And you don't know why, and you don't connect it to the dog. So this is all the theory of Dianetics, according to L. Ron Hubbard, okay? So this is why you got to be quiet when somebody is injured or hurt or in an accident, because those words could come back later if you're incautiously or saying things or throwing words around to an accident victim or somebody who's in the middle of an engram. Then you are potentially setting them up for failure or even mental or physical chronic illness in the future, because that's how powerful these engrams are, according to L. Ron Hubbard. Again, none of this is true. But if it were, then the whole society would be benefited greatly by people shutting up every time somebody was hurt, because then they wouldn't have that engramic content coming back on them. And Hubbard talks about this in Dianetics, and there is active efforts made when Scientologists are hurt to shut up. Don't say anything. Quiet. Be quiet around injured people. This is a policy in Scientology. But it's not a policy in the big wide world. Nobody else really cares about this. By the way, if you've ever heard of a silent birth, and anything related to Dianetics or Scientology and silent birth, this is why. Because even as a baby, you're being born, it's a moment of pain and unconsciousness, and you're going to experience that as a newborn baby, and all the words that are being said are going right into your little baby reactive mind, and they're going to haunt you later, unless the birth is silent, right? Which is a damn near impossible event, because birth is usually pretty painful. So keeping quiet during that is a challenge, to say the least, and completely, of course, unnecessary, because none of this is actually true. So as far as the hypocrisy of it, with what you're saying here, or the idea that, hey, how come there isn't a citizens commission for, being quiet during accidents? Well, it's exactly like you said in your question. It's because there's no money to be made in that. There's no money to be made in that. Believe me, I'm sure Hubbard tried to figure that out. He tried so many angles when he was building Scientology through the 50s and 60s. He was always forwarding some new club, some new activity, some new social thing that was going to sweep the nation, take over the world, get Scientology in every home. Hubbard was always looking for those angles. So it's very possible that at one point there was an attempt or a thought of a citizens commission for being quiet during accidents, but there's no money to be made in that. So and because Scientology at the end of the day is a money-making scam, the question answers itself. Barney Saunders. At any point when you were a Scientologist, did it become apparent to you that there were many things that people outside of Scientology knew that Scientologists didn't? For example, but not exclusively, OT3 and Xenu. Did you ever ponder upon how it was that non-Scientologists could know such things? Barney, thank you very much for this question. This is a really good one because it brings me to mind. I get to say one of the things one of my favorite sayings now, which I actually keep on a Post-it note here because it's such a important piece of information for me, and I love passing it on, which is people make themselves stupid in order to hold on to their belief. When I was a Scientologist, I would see that people had posted confidential information online or had heard, or we would hear about people out there, squirrels. They were routinely 100% called. They were referred to all the time as squirrels. And we were former Scientologists, so they were, somehow off the rails, had gone off the reservation, had gone nuts as far as we were concerned. When I was a Scientologist, I thought in very simple terms when it came to stuff like this. And it was very easy for me to think in simple terms because I had a belief. I had a set of beliefs that I needed to hold on to. And in order to hold on to those beliefs, I had to ignore or just nullify this information, this counter information that would attack my beliefs. And so I could not allow that any former Scientologist would ever be telling the truth about Scientology. I bought into the propaganda line from OSA, from the Office of Special Affairs, and from Hubbard, that every single ex-Scientologist is a liar, is a scumbag, has overts, right, as moral transgressions against Scientology. And it was those overts that were causing them to complain and be critical. It was the missed withholds, right? That whole thing. All of that, if you don't know what I'm talking about, you got to check out my podcast a couple weeks ago where I go into the thought policing in Scientology. And I break all this down, this missed withhold thing. This was powerful stuff. So powerful that I was able to use this, not just to police my own thinking, but to police other people's thinking. Because if they're saying nasty stuff about Scientology, I don't need to listen to a word of it because it's all vicious lies that are just coming out of their missed withholds, their overts, their sins. And so none of what they have to say has any value whatsoever. If I want to know about Scientology, the only source for me is L. Ron Hubbard, and nobody else has anything else important to say about it. That's how I used to think. And I would keep myself stupid by thinking that way. But that's how it went. So when you ask how, when I see people who are not Scientologists, now I'm talking, I was mostly ragging on former members there, but I would assume that if somebody was never a Scientologist and they were talking trash about Scientology or Hubbard or Miscavige or the Sea Org or any aspect of it, either A, they had no clue what they were talking about because they were never a Scientologist, so how could they? Or two, they were reading ex-Scientologists and their lies and their propaganda and their indoctrination and their nonsense and their bullshit. Right? I mean, you can use all of the tools of critical thinking. It's sort of, I don't know what you want to call it, mal-critical thinking, like bad critical thinking. It's just, you can take all the principles and you can turn them on their ear and apply them to nullify truth. Right? Because remember, our brains don't exist to sort out objective truth. We only need a story that makes sense to us. And the story that made sense to me when I was a Scientologist is that former Scientologists would leave because of their overts and would then try to corrupt and tarnish and ruin Scientology. And Scientology is the only road out. Scientology is the only hope we have. So these are the bad guys. So I'm going to listen to them? No way. I don't care what they have to say. I don't care. Right? They're evil and they must be destroyed. And that's how I thought about those people as a Scientologist. So, so that was about as much thinking as I had to do about it. And that's like the, the harsh reality of how thought policing, that sort of self-thought policing worked for me. And it was powerful stuff. So you can understand why it took so long and why it would take, when you're in a headspace like that, why it would take a personal affront of magnitude. It would take some kind of blow to you, something to literally snap you out of it, to wake you up. I mean, it's just words to express the idea. You're not really asleep. You're very awake, if anything. I mean, when I was a Sea Org member and a Scientologist, I felt like I was, energized and on fire a lot because of the power of that belief and the feeling of power, the empowerment that made me feel. So I felt the exact opposite of asleep, but mentally speaking and critically thinking wise, I was totally asleep at the wheel. I wasn't applying any critical thinking to this stuff. So that's kind of how I dealt with that. And I believe that I was far from alone in how I would process information like that as a Scientologist. And so I thought that might be of, describing all that. I hope that answers that question. And that was how I basically interpreted non-Scientologists or enemies of the church and what they had to say about it. Sonia, I'm interested in learning more about Narconon. I've seen the group documentary and some news reports about destructive cults that use things like the Alcoholics Anonymous curriculum and severely distort them to control people, take their money, and abuse them. Is it similar with Scientology and Narconon, or is it just the purification rundown scam? Thanks for raising awareness about Scientology and other destructive groups. All right, Sonia, thank you for this question. Narconon is pure Scientology. It has been secularized, which means they've sort of removed some of the Scientology-specific jargon and the organizational titling and some of the other stuff that gets into Hubbard's, sort of Scientology-specific stuff. But it's still the techniques, the methods, the commands, the processes, all pure Scientology. So it doesn't draw from AA or other programs. It doesn't have to. It's drawing from its own core of awful, which is Scientology. And the Narconon program is Scientology's expression of how they think people need to be treated in order to be gotten off of, high control drug or harmful, chemicals and stuff like that. They're totally wrong. I mean, it doesn't, it helps in about the same percentage of people that every other rehab facility sort of helps with. And I have to be honest, I think for the most part, a lot of those percentages are basically chance percentages. I mean, I'm not saying the entire rehab, industry is just full of shit, but they are kind of full of more shit than they are not in many, many ways, especially here in the United States. So, there is not a whole lot of standardized, rigorously studied, really hard science on how to deal with addiction. And addiction is something that people are still figuring out in so many ways. Nature, nurture, society versus personal responsibility. There's a lot of layers to this very, very deep and important problem. So Scientology is only bringing its shallow nonsense to it in order to make more money by saying, hey, it's real simple. If you're on drugs, it's because you have some emotional problem or a problem you're trying to solve. We're going to sort that out with auditing, but first you need to purify your body, cleanse it of all the harmful toxins, and that's the purification sweat out sauna program, which is just total horseshit, but that's the first step, followed by a battery of processes you're going to do called the objectives, where we're going to sort of slam you in the present time and get you in the here and now so you can think with what's happening around you right now and you can see the environment, what it's all about. And then we're going to give you training on what this is all about. We're going to make you sit in a chair and confront other people and actually look at them in the eye and talk to them and listen to them and deal with them. And then we're going to have you do these other drills where you're going to walk people's bodies around. Your body's going to get walked around. You're going to learn how to control other people. You're going to learn how to be controlled so that you can improve your ability to control yourself. And then we're going to do these other trainings, these other classes in Scientology so you'd understand some grammar and some ethics and some morals and some, you have a good base and foundation for ethical decisions in your life. And then we're going to set you loose in the big wide world again and call you a done deal, and you'll be off the drugs and everything will be great. And if that program worked any better than any other rehab program works, then we would know about it by now, because there have been studies, there has been research, there's been a lot of work done on this. And instead, Narconon is down to something like 10 facilities in the entire United States now. They have had criminal prosecution. There have been deaths. This has been exposed. Scientology's drug rehab program is a complete joke. It is destructive. It is harmful. It does not get the job done. And while I describe to you a series of steps that ideally would produce this product of a person who is detoxified and in present time and able to deal with his life, that's not what Scientology actually produces. That's just what they say they're producing. Narconon facilities have been shown to be rife with drugs. They're staffed by people who have done the program themselves and then reverted back to drugs. And so, these facilities can become little drug emporiums. And these are not problems unique to Scientology's drug rehab. Drug rehab is a tough industry to work in. It is a thankless job in many ways, and Scientology is not leading the charge in how to deal with this. So that's my, off the cuff criticism and analysis of Narconon. And I hope it helps clarify that situation there and your question, Sonia. So thanks for asking. All right, everybody. So that has been our show for this week. Thank you very much for coming around and listening to me babble on here, as I do every week. And of course, like I said, if you like the show and want to support it, sign up with me on Patreon. The link is below, or you can always just send me a one-off through PayPal. That is always love that I like to receive as well. Thanks, guys, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.